The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chwy.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. A planned activity centre at Loudon Park by Long Lake has the Nanaimo Area Land Trust and a member of City Council raising concerns about loss of trees. Nanaimo City Council changed course this week, narrowly voting in favour of a plan to spend close to $11 million building a new facility for boat storage with community space at Loudon Park. At a previous Finance and Audit Committee meeting, Council had voted in favour of an alternative plan that would have seen boat storage built in a different location at a cost of about $6.5 million. A number of councillors were not present at that Finance Committee meeting, and this week, in a pair of 5-4 votes, Council decided first against building the scaled-down storage and then to approve funding for the bigger building. It's anticipated that more than 40% of the trees in the park are likely to be cut down, which has drawn concern from the Nanaimo Area Land Trust.
My name's Paul Chapman. I'm the Executive Director of the Nanaimo Area Land Trust, also known as NALT.
And what are NALT's concerns with Council's decision around Loudon Park this week?
Yeah, and really our concerns reach back to the original decision made in 2019 and then the plans that came forward from that. And it's, I think in city council decisions in every park, they're trying to come up with a balance of the values and the uses of that park. So, I would, in Loudon Park specifically, there's obviously a very active paddling and rowing community that's involved there, but there's also the people that enjoy swimming and picnicking in that park. And then from NALT's perspective, what we look at are those natural values that make those parks a special place to us. And certainly there's the lakefront there, but also it's a Loudon Park is kind of a funny little park, right? It's a very small little park that is quite developed in terms of it's a groomed park with the boathouse structure and bathrooms and that sort of thing. And there's no understory to speak of under the trees, but there are some maturing coastal Douglas fir trees there, and it's a place where when things get too hot, like maybe during a heat dome, families can go to cool off by the lake and be in the shade of those trees. And so, there's those natural values that assist our community health in terms of those sorts of things, as well as the recreation and, the various sorts of recreation that happen there. And then in terms of an urban canopy, one tree provides shade and maybe 2 or 3 trees provide shade. But when you get a stand of trees and when those trees are allowed to develop to a significant age, then what you start to get is habitat, and that's what you have there. Even though it's heavily impacted by human use, there is habitat that exists in those trees in that canopy, and the sort of the largest of the boathouse proposals that was approved by council on Monday takes out 40% of the trees, and some of those trees will be those big old Douglas firs that people take pictures of their kids running into the lake or take pictures through them of the sunsets on the lake, and those are going to be gone, and there'll be a large building in place. And so that's I think that the balance of values of the park would have been better represented with the original option that council was voting on Monday, which would have been that smaller boathouse that would have accommodated to to the same extent as the larger boathouse the needs of the paddling community to safely lock up their boats, but would have balanced that with the other park users there. So that's one of those things where those values I think are weighted too heavily towards one user group than the other at detriment of some of the natural values of the park.
In a letter last month, NALT wrote that it had tried to arrange a site visit and a discussion with a couple of members of city staff, including the general manager of community services, but that you were never able to arrange that site visit. Could you tell me more about that?
Yeah, well, we wanted, when we heard that there were going to be 43% of the trees in the park were going to come down, like that's a significant number, large park or small park, that's a significant percentage of the trees coming down. And we wanted to get a better sense of which ones those were and how that would look and maybe have some conversations about, how the things could be differently to have less of an impact, especially less of an impact on those older coastal Douglas fir. So we tried first with a member of Parks staff to arrange that visit, but it couldn't never was arranged. Then we were trying with the recently retired um, Parks manager Richard Harding to arrange a meeting, but he seemed to think that that the consideration of the boathouse was on the back burner, and that it was quite likely that if anything was built, it was going to be the smaller version. So, we took some hope from that and and trusted that as the outcome. But we still were curious. We still wanted to see those trees, and we still tried to arrange meetings to see which trees that they were talking about, because I think people are going to be very surprised when they start riveting off which trees are going to come down and then start cutting down those trees. I think people are going to be very surprised to see that the face of the park, the sort of iconic look of the park, is going to be gone. It's going to be something else entirely. And I think Councillor Gesselbrecht was talking about, it's creating a very large structure in a very small park, and that's what's going to come to dominate that park. For users other than paddlers, I mean, the people that are out paddling on the lake will they have will have good facilities for their storage, but they would have had the same sort of storage space in the smaller building that was proposed. So again, it's a balance of user groups and the decision that was made was to the detriment of the natural values of the park.
So if I understand that correctly, you'd reached out, you'd expressed some concerns that in one of these options, 40% of the trees in the park could be cut down. For people listening, the way this played out was that previously at a Finance and Audit Committee meeting, which is basically a city council meeting where the council members go in depth with staff and can debate. A previous one had advanced this recommendation that we're going to build this other smaller building in a different spot. It would have the same amount of storage specifically for boats, but would be missing some of the kind of community center amenities that had been put forward. This week, it came back to city council to get their stamp of approval one way or the other. Councillors rejected that plan and instead approved this other plan with the larger building that would see 40% of the trees cut down. So when you had reached out, the staff had said, well, it's probably not going to happen, so we're good.
Yeah, that was the impression we were given, and I think that's the impression that Richard Harding had. They again, Councillor Gesselbrecht talked about the reason that the building of the park had been of the building had been delayed was because the costs had become so high, to such a point that almost triple the original estimate, and that the smaller building was that compromise between budget and function, and I would say the other park users beyond the paddling community. I think the paddling community does some really remarkable stuff at that park in terms of inclusive activities in that park, and I applaud them in that. And I think that they're it's super that they have use of the lake for their activities. And it would have been great if the smaller option had been approved and they had all that safe storage they needed, and as well as the other users could have enjoyed the park in the way that they are used to enjoying it now. And again, I talk about those safe spaces that we could gather during a pandemic, for instance, they weren't inside, they were outside, and they were in our parks. And we're reducing the amount of outside space in one of our parks, and increasing the amount of built area. And in the balance of values, I would say that they might have got the balance. They voted on the balance in a way I would not have, and certainly not in the way that NALT pointed out to council.
Is there anything specific you think people need to know about the trees we're talking about, the tree cover, for folks who aren't familiar with Loudon Park, which is on the side of Long Lake?
Yeah, they're mature coastal Douglas fir, so they're quite old trees. We're not talking old growth, of course. Everything has been an altered landscape here, but these are older trees that are have a substantial canopy, and in that canopy, you'll find the birds and the bees and the small animals that make their homes in those trees. Even though it's in a groomed park area, that connected canopy still provides some habitat for those things. And like I say, one or two or three trees is shade, but if you get 30 trees in an area, you start to get habitat, especially across that canopy. And they're large trees. If you're standing there, they're wider around than I am, which is saying quite something. That when you remove those trees and put in new trees, you're going to be putting in smaller trees, probably trees of a different species, and you are going to take decades to maybe achieve the sort of canopy connections that exist in those trees now. Maybe achieve that. So you really are losing those values for some decades, if not longer than that.
Is there anything we haven't covered so far that you think it's important to bring to this conversation?
No, I think that all the way along in that chain of decisions that has made, reaching back to the original Finance and Audit Committee in October of 2019. Do I have that date right? Yes, 2019. That the community has been, NALT doesn't sort of go searching for these things to, complain about. What we do is we hear about things that the community is concerned about, and this is how Loudon Park came to us, right? That's how it got on our radar, was that the people that use the park were concerned about what was going to happen with a large building being built and how it would affect the trees. Well, in terms of the effect on the trees, it's the worst case scenario. So I think that there was an opportunity for some compromise, and obviously majority of council voted in a different way. And I understand that they have other concerns that they are thinking about, but in our parks, I would think that those natural values should be one of those should carry maybe more weight than it did in this decision.
Paul Chapman, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Paul Chapman is Executive Director of the Nanaimo and Area Land Trust.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
One member of Nanaimo City Council is calling a decision that council made this week excessive, destructive, but mostly tragic. Councillor Ben Gesselbrecht used those words in a social media post lamenting council's decision on a proposed boathouse and activity centre at Loudon Park on Long Lake. Council opted to approve funding for a building with boat storage and community space, which is expected to cost close to $11 million and which will necessitate the cutting down of about 40% of the trees in the park, according to the Nanaimo Area Land Trust. At a March Finance and Audit Committee meeting, some members of council had previously voted in favour of an alternate plan that would have seen a scaled-down facility with the same amount of boat storage built in a different location in the park. That option was budgeted at around $6.5 million. This week's vote saw councillors Ian Thorpe, Tyler Brown, Janice Perino, and Cheryl Armstrong, along with Mayor Leonard Krogh, vote in favour of the larger project, with councillors Paul Manley, Aaron Hemmons, Hilary Eastmuir, and Ben Gesselbrecht opposed, each of them having favoured the scaled-down building. I spoke with Councillor Gesselbrecht about his reaction to the decision. Councillor Gesselbrecht, you described yourself as shocked by Council's decision on Loudon Park changes. Can you explain that reaction?
Yes, basically, council approved to put a large building right in the middle of a very small beloved park on Long Lake. Basically, that would remove the majority of the mature trees that are right in the central part of the park. There's 29 trees will be removed. For a building that the majority of it is boat storage. It does have bathrooms in it and some club space and community amenity space, but a large portion it's for storing boats. And it's 3 times over budget. It's going to cost $11 million. So for that quantity of money, basically we are decimating a well-used park and spending, $6 million more than the other options at a time when money is tight and there's a lot of other priorities than this. So I just am in a bit disbelief. I don't think others fully realize what the footprint of this building was and where it was being located, and it just seems to be such an excessive, destructive move.
You mentioned there, you suggested the building will involve the cutting down of the majority of the mature Douglas fir trees in the park. NALT, the Nanaimo Area Land Trust, has pegged that as around 40% of the tree cover in the park could be cut down. On that front, if a location could be found for the same building at around the same cost that didn't involve cutting down a significant portion of the trees in the park, would you be supportive of it?
Yeah, I would be. I think that I don't think for the cost. Like, I think you could get the same type of functionality out of this building for less than half. Around $5-6 million. Basically, that would be building the upgrading the washrooms that are currently there, which is part of the project, on their current footprint, which makes sense. You're not removing any trees. And then you'd be putting a facility for the canoe and kayak club where their boats are currently stored. I mean, this is not a huge club. There's, about 30 to 40 families that are part of the rowing club, and maybe, 12 families that are part of the canoe and kayak club. Compared to the overall users of the rest of the community that use it. So a $4 million investment in the club is very significant. And with that option, there's the ability to expand the park later date, because there's a lot of properties that align the lake that the city can purchase. And, we've definitely heard that there's some willing homeowners there, and more facilities can be expanded later on. But to take, the very small amount of green space that exists there and basically put a building on it. So I don't know if you've been to Long Lake Park, but basically you pull into that parking lot and you look down at the beachfront and you see a large grove of fir trees, and there's some arbutus trees. That whole grove is going to be cut. Yeah, I would be very surprised if others do not share the same feeling as I do in terms of just disbelief.
Part of the discussion around this at the city council meeting this week was this idea that some kind of upgrade to the boat storage facility at that park had been an item on the agenda of councils for coming up on 20 years, and that there was a real this we have to decide on doing something now or cut bait, and this was a moment to do that. How do you feel like that influenced
I think
things?
it's completely manufactured. Like, yeah, any community group can put an agenda on the on city council, and if there's enough support, people will investigate building something for it. The discussion was, in part to like upgrade the built bathrooms that have been there since 1965. Yeah, that probably needs to get done. In that time, there has been a rowing and kayak community, and we're not talking like, thousands of people. 30 to 40 families for the rowing club, about 12 families for the canoe and kayak club, that also are using the space and needed a facility. How it got to the point for a $12 million build is beyond me, but sometimes things can snowball. But there's plenty of opportunity for off ramps, and in that 10-year period or 15-year period where there's been many different iterations of plans, and a lot of them have been a lot more modest, with much smaller footprints, and those could have been pursued. And somehow in 2019, 2018, there were some grand plans that council at the time discussed, and somebody's like, oh, we should put some community space in there. And then it went to an architect who I've heard that actually never went directly to the site. And this plan was developed. And it really was brought to our attention. It was brought to the community for some feedback. And then when it came back, like, I think like 3 years ago, and the project that was presented to us was 3 times the budget. We budgeted $4 million for it, and it came back at like $10-12 million. It was really, we thought, staff came back and it was like, seemed like it was being abandoned. They're going to pursue other opportunities, maybe on a neighboring house. And they came back after 2 years and presented council with this other option to put a storage facility on where the current one is, like where the old tennis courts were, and then look at opportunities down the road on neighboring properties. And then council, just on a whim, decided, no, we want to go with the option that was 3 times more the allotted budget, the $11 million option, and just on a whim made a decision. And I don't think people fully really acknowledge like the footprint of it, and that there's a whole other communities of usage that are using that direct spot where the building is going to be put there. So yeah, I think it's a really classic example how projects can snowball, and all of a sudden a decision gets made where it's a bit manufactured, the urgency, because the canoe, the rowing club, their boats are out in the rain, and they do need somewhere to store it, and that really was what the urgent problem was. So, and there should be more questions on like, if we want to build like a large rowing and paddle sport facility, is Loudon Park the spot? Like, when you look at like, okay, what do we want to do? Have regattas there of 300, 400, 500 people? The parking spot can handle like 20 cars, and then it's like lines of cars up and down the thing. We're gonna have to build larger parking spots in that area. I mean, and there's other lakes, like Brandon Lake has a lot more space around it, and it's definitely the right, a size that you can have this type of activity on. And I don't want to disparage the rowing and kayak club, because I really do think that they're doing great stuff and they're getting people outside and using their bodies, and the whole competition. And I think it's a great way for youth to be engaged. But I don't think it needs to be in conflict with a small piece of green space and a part of the community that is identified as an urban node growth zone. So that area is going to get densified dramatically over the next couple decades. And really, this is probably one of the only little park green spots with trees on it that exists. So yeah, and then on top of it, like everybody's worried about budgets and taxes, and just the optics of spending $11 million on a facility to store boats and upgrading bathrooms just doesn't, seem to align at all with what the current mood and tone is of the community to begin with.
So this is being voted on. It's done. What's your understanding of the next steps and the timeline and where you go from here on this?
Well, I really genuinely want, council members to take a sober second thought at what actually is being proposed and will happen, and to really think about what's in the best interest of the wider community. I think that did not get taken into account to the degree that it should have been. There was a lot of focus on the canoe and kayak and rowing clubs needs, but not about the surrounding neighborhood, not about, the thousands of people that come through and use that park in the summer, about, the families that, seek refuge under those trees when, we're dealing with 30-degree heat. And I really hope that, we take some time to think about it and reconsider this decision and really look at what the other options are that would make a much better solution for everybody.
Councillor Gesselbrecht, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Joe. Take care.
Nanaimo City Councillor Ben Gesselbrecht. In the lead up to this program, I also reached out to the Nanaimo Canoe and Kayak Club and the Nanaimo Rowing Club, hoping to talk about the decision and the impact of the proposed facility, but didn't hear back by broadcast time. I also reached out to the city of Nanaimo on this, and I'm hopeful of bringing you more information and additional perspectives on this issue on a future program. For now, that's all the time we have. You've been listening to Mid-Coast Morning. I'm Joe Q, host and producer. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Mid-Coast Morning.
This program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.